when my brother and his family moved into their new home. I remember thinking how quiet and isolated the place was. It was an old two-story house, sitting at the end of a long driveway, surrounded by towering trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself had been waiting for someone to fill its empty rooms. At first, everything seemed normal. My brother, his wife, and their 6-year-old son were excited about the fresh start. The house was spacious, with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings. It had a certain charm, but there was something else, too. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I visited them a few days after they moved in, bringing a housewarming gift and helping them unpack. As I walked through the front door, a strange sensation crept over me. It wasn't just the usual eeriness of an old house. It felt more personal, as if something unseen was watching from the shadows. I shrugged it off, blaming my imagination. During dinner, my nephew talked excitedly about the house, his new room, and his favorite toy, a bright red rubber ball that he played with every day. His little voice filled the space, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air inside the house felt thick, almost suffocating, and I noticed my brother's wife glancing nervously toward the darkened hallway more than once. Later that night, as I was about to leave, my brother pulled me aside. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Have you ever walked into a room and felt like someone was already there?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. "Like you interrupted something?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, why?" He exhaled sharply, glancing toward the stairs. "Because ever since we moved in, I keep getting that feeling. And I swear, sometimes, I hear footsteps upstairs when no one's there." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "It's an old house. Creaky floors, shifting wood. You know how it is." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. That night, as I drove home, I kept thinking about the way my brother had looked, like a man trying to convince himself that everything was fine. But something told me that whatever was in that house, it wasn't just settling wood. Days turned into weeks, and my brother's family started to settle into the house. My nephew, always full of energy, spent most of his time playing with his favorite toy, a bright red rubber ball. He would toss it against the walls in the garage, laughing as it bounced back to him. It was such a simple thing, but for him, it was a source of endless entertainment. Then one day, the ball vanished. At first, my nephew wasn't too concerned. He assumed it had rolled under some furniture or gotten mixed in with his other toys. But as the days passed and he still couldn't find it, frustration set in. My brother and his wife helped him search, turning the house upside down, checking under couches, inside cabinets, even outside near the driveway. But the ball was gone completely, inexplicably gone. I visited that weekend, and my nephew ran up to me as soon as I walked in. "Uncle, have you seen my ball?" he asked, his little face scrunched up in worry. "No, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Where did you last have it?" "In the garage. I put it in my toy box, but now it's gone." His certainty struck me. Kids lose things all the time, but this was different. The way he insisted that he knew where he had left it made me uneasy. My brother looked at me over his son's head and gave a small shake of his head, as if to say we've already looked everywhere. That night, after my nephew had gone to bed, I sat with my brother and his wife at the dining table. "It's just a ball," his wife said, forcing a chuckle. "Maybe we're overthinking it." My brother didn't respond. He just stared at the darkened hallway leading to the stairs, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "The thing is," he finally said, his voice low, "I remember seeing it the day before it disappeared. It was in the garage. I saw it sitting right on top of the toy box. I know for a fact it was there. So maybe he took it out and forgot." I offered, though I wasn't convinced. He shook his head. "No, he was at school that day. The house was empty. A heavy silence settled over us. Something about that missing ball felt wrong, and none of us could shake the feeling that it wasn't lost. It had been taken. Months passed, and the memory of the missing ball faded. My nephew had stopped asking about it, moving on to other toys and games. Life in the house carried on as usual, or so it seemed. Then, one quiet afternoon, my brother was home alone. His wife had taken their son to visit relatives, and he was enjoying the rare silence. He had just finished making himself a cup of coffee when he remembered some paperwork he needed to finish upstairs. As he climbed the stairs, something hit him. Hard. A sudden, sharp thud against his lower back made him lurch forward, spilling coffee onto the steps. He caught himself on the railing, his heart pounding. Instinctively, he turned around and froze. There, resting on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, was the missing rubber ball. For a moment, he couldn't move. His mind struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. The ball was unmistakable, bright red, slightly scuffed from months of play. The same ball that had vanished without a trace. He took slow, cautious steps down, feeling his breath hitch in his throat. His hands trembled as he reached for it. The texture was familiar, the weight exactly as he remembered. It was real. But how? His eyes darted around the empty house. Every door was locked, every window shut. He was completely alone. Then, an awful realization crept in. The ball hadn't just reappeared. It had hit him. Someone, or something, had thrown it. A chill spread through his body. He placed the ball on the dining table and stepped back, his mind racing. The house was silent, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like someone was watching. He grabbed his phone and called me. "You need to come over," he said, his voice tight. Now, I arrived at my brother's house within the hour, finding him pacing near the dining table. His face was pale, his eyes darting toward the red rubber ball sitting motionless where he had left it. He recounted what had happened, his voice low and uncertain, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. I could hear the edge of fear in his tone, something I had never heard from him before. "Are you sure it didn't just roll down from somewhere?" I asked, though even I didn't believe that explanation. "I felt it hit me," he snapped, rubbing his lower back as if the impact still lingered. "It didn't roll. It was thrown." The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unseen. That's when I noticed it. The room had grown noticeably colder. A faint chill wrapped around my skin, prickling the hairs on my arms. It was the middle of summer. There was no reason for the temperature to drop like that. My brother felt it too. I could see it in his eyes. "I need to know what's going on here," he muttered. That night, after his wife and son had returned, my brother started digging. He searched through old property records, news articles, anything that could tell him more about the house they had been living in for the past year. And then he found something. A name. A child's name. The house had once belonged to a couple who kept to themselves, almost completely isolated from the outside world. They had a son, but no one in the neighborhood ever saw him. No playdates, no school records, no doctor visits. It was as if the boy had never existed, until one day, he simply disappeared. There was no official report, no missing persons case. The parents told neighbors they had sent him away to live with distant relatives. No one questioned it. And then, years later, they too vanished. The house was sold, their story buried beneath decades of new ownership. But something or someone had never left. My brother looked up from his laptop, his face drained of color. "I think the boy died here," he whispered. I didn't know what to say, but deep down, I knew he was right. Something was still in this house, and it wasn't finished playing. That night, after reading about the forgotten child, my brother decided he needed to confront whatever was in the house. He wanted answers, or at the very least, He wanted it to stop. I wasn't so sure that was a good idea, but I stayed. We set up in the living room, placing the red rubber ball in the center of the floor. My brother spoke into the silence, his voice steady but cautious. "If someone is here, if you need something, show us." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a creak from the hallway. Not the kind a house makes when it settles. It was slow, deliberate, like the weight of careful footsteps pressing into the old wooden floor. The air turned frigid. Then the ball. It moved. Not a roll, not a bounce. It slid, inch by inch, across the floor, stopping at my brother's feet. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. He swallowed hard. "What do you want?" The answer came instantly. A sharp bang from upstairs. Then another, and another. A patter. I turned to my brother, my heart pounding. "That sounds like someone knocking," he finished, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. We didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Then my brother stood, his face set with determination. I need to see. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this was a terrible idea. But before I could, he was already climbing the stairs. I forced myself to follow. The upstairs hallway was dark. The only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, casting shadows that seemed too long, too deep. The knocking had stopped, but as we neared the end of the hall, my brother's son's room, the door creaked open, and inside, standing in the corner, barely illuminated by the pale glow of the moonlight, was a child, small, barefoot, his head tilted downward, his features obscured by the darkness. But the ball sat at his feet. Then, in the silence, a whisper, "Play with me." Every hair on my body stood on end. My brother choked on a breath, stepping back, and just like that, the room was empty. The child was gone. The ball sat perfectly still. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, my brother's family packed their things. They left the house within the week, selling it without a second thought. I don't know who lives there now. I don't want to know. But sometimes I wonder if that little boy is still waiting, still playing, still searching for someone to throw the ball back. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Fear and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Here, you'll find more real stories filled with mystery, psychological horror, and the supernatural every week. Before you go, make sure to check out the 2 videos that just popped up in the end screen. I promise, they'll leave you with goosebumps. See you next time, if you dare.